afternoon, Tri-Cities. It's Wednesday at 2, time for a special edition of Coffee with Karl. I'm Karl Dye from TriDeck, and we have this special edition today because we have a chance to talk with Representative Matt Boehnke from our own 8th Legislative District here in Washington. Welcome, Representative Boehnke. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Karl. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, no, it's been a long time, and obviously you've been in the session and now are out of that, and kind of gonna have a good conversation today, talking about some of the legislation that you were a part of or that passed, and how that'll impact the Tri-Cities. So we appreciate you making some time for us, and we're always happy to schedule a special one just to get a little bit of time with you.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. It was definitely a interesting session. I think it's going to be historic times. Hopefully we don't have to do the remote thing again.
Well, that's awesome. You already answered one of my questions. That's cool. And I can't remember because it is a different time, but I don't know if we talked about it, but I did bring a mug, and I'm not drinking out of it, but I just thought this mug was kind of, I think, symbolic of what you're out. It's one of the Starbucks, like I was there mug. It's about state of Washington. But I think what's cool about it is when Starbucks, as an example, shows a picture of our state on this mug, it's got like a ferry, some salmon, an apple, which is kind of us, a tree, some mountains, sun, which is us. But I think I use it as an example of the challenge that you have when you go and represent all of us in Olympia, and that is, how do we bring the state together? How do we make folks not make them, but encourage them to understand that there is a whole state here. We represent all different parts of it, and how do we come up with good legislation for the whole state, which I think you do a really, really good job of. I'm just excited to get to know you and appreciate the job that you do. But I thought that mug was kind of representative of, maybe the challenge and the opportunity that you go through all the time.
Yeah, and I would agree. I would say it's more of an opportunity that we can get out and hear the voice of Eastern Washington and be engaged in those discussions to make sure our voice is heard, and it's heard throughout the state, because it does impact us when we discuss about what's happening in Puget Sound, what's happening in Olympia, especially taxes, a lot of things that mean a lot to people. And of course, in this last year, frankly, of hearing what news they can trust and really where it comes from. And I think getting out and staying engaged in our community is a big key.
Oh, totally. Well, Representative, let's get into it. And I know I think you and I have had the discussion because we've had a chance to meet, in the year and a quarter since I've been here a couple times. But you want to just give us a little bit of background about you and your experience and career, including running for the House and serving in the legislature?
Well, thanks, Karl. A lot of people forget I actually grew up in Kennewick. Went to public school in the Tri-Cities all throughout, and honored, as my parents said, with the values and things that supported me as it went forward. In order to pay for college, my parents said, I got to get a job, do everything else. And I actually earned a ROTC scholarship at Eastern Washington University. Nice. Went there for pre-law, was going to go to Gonzaga to go to law school. When something happened on the way to law school, I ended up becoming the top cadet out of the state of Washington to qualify for flight school. And wow. So like any person growing up would say, I'm adventurous, trying to look forward to actually keeping that adventurous lifestyle and challenging myself. I said, sure, I'll go for it. Went off to flight school right about the time Desert Storm was kicking off. So it was one of those strange moments in life that you fear what's happening, similar this last year to a lot of people's concerns about what our country's going through, what things are happening. And I remember it vividly. And after that, spent 21 years on active duty. We moved 27 times, spent time in Iraq, Afghanistan, Israel, Korea, and then multiple states throughout the United States, and serving our country in different command and staff levels, and ended up at the Pentagon, helping start up a thing called U.S. Army Cyber Command, and got into that to make sure we could secure our data and working with what we perceived. And this was coming out of Iraq in 09 and 08, and seeing how much more data we had on the international front, and especially locally, and what we're producing in that area. But came back to retire and raise my family like everybody else in a great community that we enjoy. Be around grandparents was our goal. And then have them secure at a current high school. So our youngest actually got to go to one high school here in town, Boehnke, and our oldest went to 3 different high schools from Arizona, Kansas, and Oklahoma. So it's good to kind of get settled down, get that way, and be around grandparents. And while I was doing that, I thought, all right, I'm going to go sit in on some city council meetings and see what I can do to support, my city that's helped me over those years, and wanted to give something back and always wanted to volunteer. So I think I was one of only 2 people sitting in the back of a Kennewick City Council meeting when Mayor at the time, Steve Young, said, you want to get involved, and helped me get involved with the Arts Commission in the city, working on the roundabouts. Some of those were, I was supportive and helped decide on what we put in these roundabouts and make sure our city continues to grow, and especially has that arts background. And then I was asked to go ahead and run against Bob Olson, who was a great man, great family, and can't think of enough for helping kind of kick me and motivate me to get involved and continue to, I think, carry on what he had envisioned for the Tri-Cities, especially Kennewick as well. And then while I was on the city council, I didn't know Representative Larry Haler that much. He reached out to me at the time and said, I'm thinking of stepping down. I didn't want to make it too loud to everybody, but he said, looks like you were doing great stuff at the city of Kennewick, got to know me a little bit better, and said I'd support you if you want to run for my seat. And that was a quick 3 years ago. It seems like a lifetime the way this last 10 months went. I think we jokingly call it COVID turned into like dog years. It seemed like the last 12 months turned into the last 12 years with a lot of us, and especially my eyes having to be on 10 to 12 hour Zoom meetings. So hopefully can rest my eyes over the interim, but that's where we got today. And I'm just honored and privileged to support and represent the mighty 8th district and the citizens who continue to, motivate me, I think, and what we do. And throughout this, it means a lot to reopen us safely, reopen our schools, and get us back to normal.
Oh, totally. Well, I have to ask, when you were a helicopter pilot in the Army, when you started off, you went to flight school?
Yeah. Flew a couple of helicopters and jumped out a couple of airplanes, ate a lot of bugs in places around the world.
Well, that's great. We were just on a call yesterday for a Mid-Columbia Energy Initiative, and you did such a good job of kind of just giving a recap of the legislature as far as some significant bills that passed, and especially ones that you led the charge on. Could we start off maybe just with that? I think that way you can kind of lay out from your perspective the things that were accomplished, and we could just start at that high level and then kind of delve into some of these specific pieces, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And slow me down because there was a lot going on. The one big thing that people always are concerned about when politicians are in session, the joke always is, keep your hands on your pocketbook or your wallet, because we're coming after your money. And frankly, we have a ton of money that got influxed from the federal level that allowed us to get back to our core. I believe people forget the focus on was to reopen and to support us what happened with the impact of COVID, whether it was our business, our schools, employees that were out of work, even childcare, and the impacts that we've had in our community. Our goal was to get COVID, but really K through 12 education, higher ed, and to do it in a way, at least on our side, that we could pay for it with current funds without having to tap into our rainy day fund or even too much more of the federal funding. Because sometimes too much of a good thing is a bad thing. And you got to make sure you understand when this comes with sustainability issues of how are we going to sustain and maintain programs that are then going to have a one-time shot of this additional funding. So we had over, I believe it's 58.9 billion in state funds that were allocated, which was increased to 7 billion over the 2019-21 budget. I think it was yesterday we got word the governor went in and signed it. He did veto a portion of it, so we're going to have to still see what's happening there. It does leave a fund ending that we've increased almost, like I said, almost 13% in our budget, which kind of concerns me how it continues to grow. And then, of course, capital gains tax was instituted as well, first time in the history of the state, which a lot of people didn't like. And then continuing on that with our transportation budget that is in question right now because of one of the vetoes that he brought up yesterday, which, if you're hearing from his press conference, we might be going into a special session. We're hearing to prepare for one. It's funny how you go into this with the transportation budget, but we couldn't during COVID. So that's kind of our, thing. And then the bipartisan support that got us to where we are and actually worked really hard throughout this remote session and things that we were doing. And then he goes ahead and vetoes a portion of it. I think got a lot of people disgruntled and, want to make sure that we're doing the right things for the right reasons and supporting that. Those were kind of the big ones. Our goal was, of course, to look at law enforcement reform, not, defund the police. A lot of people were coming out with social equity issues that were hitting not only our state, but our nation. We knew coming in, Chop Chaz was an issue. A lot of people voiced their opinion about how the state responded to law enforcement, community safety, community service in our communities, and what we can do to make sure we better listen, I frankly think, to community members that have been marginalized or even the underserved in our communities. And we got to do a better job across the board. Luckily, I tell people we've been kind of a beacon of excellence. I think Richland, Kennewick, Pasco, or Tri-City area, I know we've been blessed because the individuals who are out there, our first responders, always do an excellent job, and their families of what they're doing. They live in our communities, they work with us, and they're out at all these community events over the years, and we fostered that relationship. But you can always improve, and that's our goal, to make sure we're continuing to improve. We're continuing to look out for others and listen to people's opinions on those. Those are kind of the highlights. I don't know if you want me to go into others. There's so many.
No, that was really good. I think you mentioned the governor's veto that just came up on the transportation bill. Can you explain that a little bit more? I read a couple articles about it. I'm still trying to understand, because I think what I'd read was that maybe there was kind of a grand compromise that really was bipartisan to try to actually pass this transportation budget this year, which sounds like it was, a challenge to get everybody on the same page. And then how does the governor's veto potentially affect that? And then I think it's kind of tied into carbon capture or carbon credits situation. So can you give us a kind of overview of that, or the process leading up to it? And then how does the governor's veto affect it?
Sure. No, and it is complicated, like you mentioned, because this was tied into about 3 or 4 other bills. And as you're going through, you have this initial kind of setup of, we're going to go after what we need to do. First thing, like in any kind of budget, you look at what's federally mandated or state mandates regulations. So we've been asked by courts to ensure that we have fish passage barriers taken down, to make sure we have properly utilizing the fish passage to origin, supporting things that we can do across our cities, states, and the traffic we can to minimize that. Vehicles have been impacting our transportation budget as well, but also looking at the environmental impacts that you can see to reduce those in marginalized areas. So a lot of this was impacted, but looking at projects so we can build bridges, we can maintain lanes, that we can reduce traffic problems. Of course, a lot of these Eastern Washington people say, why does that matter to us? Because it's mainly the I-5 corridor. And frankly, a lot of it goes to that. And people are like concerned, going, why are you voting yes for this? I know people here locally forget, when I grew up, Highway 12 to Walla Walla, and some of this around the Lewis and Clarkson area, was always a 2-lane road. And I remember when I was 16 taking my driver's license test, driving out that way, and it was scary then. We finally got money. I believe this is going to do it, to get us to 4 lanes all the way to Walla Walla, and finally close that chapter. And so that was part of my yes vote to doing this. To your point, we did have a Climate Commitment Act that was going to try to get at reduction of engines, vehicles, transportation efforts in the state. A lot of people thought about shutting down. Actually, everybody will move to electric vehicles. We're not there yet. So this veto does have some of that tied into whether we're going to move quicker or slower. It may extend that time frame now to 20 years from now instead of 10 or 15. The carbon capture thing you mentioned was actually some of the good stuff. We talked about what we can do in a carbon market. Our concerns there was that it's going to be tied a lot to California and some other states that we've seen that may not be the right option for the state of Washington. Whenever you partner with other things, it's kind of good. You get some efficiencies there, but you lose a little power and control of local people's vote. And then if we're tied to a market to where you can see today, gas is almost over $4 a gallon down in California, and ours is rising. Last week, it was a lot cheaper. This week, I think we're up 10 cents, even more. And I know it had a lot to do with the oil pipeline on the East Coast and that cyber hack, but it shows that increase of all these are going to then hit the impacts or the pocketbooks of each one of our users, of whether it's 5 cents and even up to 60 cents a gallon on our taxes when you get to the gas pump, or then possibly utilize a road usage charge onto the fees, where if you're just driving an electric vehicle or others, you may be taxed there as well.
Okay. That helps a lot. That explains a lot. I'd read about the, by 2030, we wouldn't be able to buy a car with the internal combustion engine. And so the governor's veto affected that. And that makes sense. And I think on the carbon market, those are great points, because I just read an article about like a forest conservancy, that was set up like as a 501c3 back in Massachusetts or something like that. And they were actually getting the carbon credits from California, and realizing that we're all in the same environment and understanding where they're going. But if there was something that was much more Washington centric, and if planting trees as an example is a way to use a carbon credit or something like that, it would be nice if it was a Washington tree, right?
And that was our goal. Our only thing that we agree with the overall policy. It's the underlying part that it's given a lot to other people in this pool. And you're right. If you want to do it impacting, let's impact it locally. Let's impact it and allow the local citizens to have that voice in it.
Yeah. But so was that a pretty common theme? I mean, I appreciate the way you laid it out, that COVID and COVID response was really the first priority for everybody back there. But how much of a driver or an interconnector in a lot of the legislation that you guys worked on this year was kind of climate change and carbon? Was that sort of an underlying theme that you saw come up a lot, or what was your take on it, Representative?
I think that's a great point. There was some there, but a lot of it turned into, as we started seeing the caseloads actually come down in January and start people seeing other states getting back to work and reopening, and the vaccination getting out. We had the initial push of, we didn't know if we'd ever get out in December, and then come the new year, we were actually starting to put, vaccinations in arms and shots. And then it was a matter of logistics to get it out to individuals to set up. We were proud to have one of the mass vaccination sites, which I visited again this morning to go check on the guys out of Benton Franklin, the fairgrounds. And we've just been getting lauded about how much great work we're doing out there. And that was that whole push in January to make sure we could set it up, as well as, like you mentioned, of the businesses and the impact employees, people that were out of work. We had all the ESD issues from the hack, the money that was stolen, but people still haven't been paid, and what we can do to support families in our communities. Those people who want to get back to work didn't have childcare. A lot of those childcare centers were shut down, or they couldn't have the PPE that the hospitals, the healthcare centers, and others had that supply chain in there. And of course, this was in the middle, and I say jokingly, because everybody had to run on toilet paper during that time. I jokingly said that on Facebook the other day of, don't forget, get your toilet paper this month, because now we have an annual thing now. Now, we don't need to do that anymore. Luckily, we're getting the supply chain back, and we're getting that economics going. And I was proud to support a couple bills that were supportive of that. And so our goal was not only minimizing the number of bills, which was a good thing, and I think every citizen could be thankful for that. I think we had a third less total than the last 10 years combined that came into this. But I think a lot of it too was because we're in a remote session. We're concerned about rural broadband. We were concerned about the infrastructure throughout the communities, and of course our grid reliability that you mentioned. We talked about yesterday with the Energy Council.
So you just hit on it, and I think you made a reference to it before about getting back to meeting in person hopefully next year. But with the remote session this year, can you give us an idea of, like, what, from your perspective, what do you think were the negatives, and then were there any positives that might be good additions to future legislative sessions?
Yeah, well, I'll take the first one. I think the remote session was good and bad. The good thing, it allowed a lot more people to remotely to get into the hearings, to voice their opinions, to drive over a snowy pass, risk your life, 8 hours, 4 hours there, 4 hours back, to just get 2 hours or 2 minutes sometimes in a committee hearing to voice your opinion. It's kind of nuts on how you run government, especially with Eastern Washington individuals who think that their voice is not heard anyways. And now we have to go even farther to get to that location to have that heard. Remote testimony allowed for a lot more people in the Tri-City area to do that. We were tied into a lot of the emails so people can get the word out more. And for all the bad news social media gets, it was one good thing to spread the word through social media, to be more engaged, to understand bills more, the policies. When individuals ask me why I vote no on a lot of them, there's a lot of yes and a lot of good things within policies that you like, but it's usually the one or two things that ends up becoming too much you can do and say, no, I'm going to have to be a no today, or allow us to work with people to run amendments to make sure that the bill gets better and we can improve those bills. So I think one of the big ones for COVID is having that remote testimony. I think it's a shout out to our telecoms and even and locally our utilities that have such a vibrant internet. We did a really good job. I'm proud to help support additional funding through the Department of Commerce and the Rural Broadband Office to get more funding out here. We reached out, and I guess Lisa Brown mentioned again, we got additional federal funding as well to match that. So I think you're going to see a lot more people running ditches, throwing down cable, fiber. We're going to get 2 or 3 times as fast. And in the time of COVID, probably sped up a lot of those projects. If we didn't have COVID, it'd probably be another 10 years before we got around to it. I mean, we've been talking rural broadband, I think, in the state for the last 15 years myself that I remember. So now it just kind of sped up things, get those projects going and got higher priorities on them. So some of those are good. The bad piece is when you're doing policy and legislation, you usually want to work together as a team. And if somebody's close, you can kind of, do it in committee meetings, or you can meet in between meetings or in the hallways, things where you can get a lot of the work done. We couldn't do. There's a lot of times I would meet people for coffee or go to lunch or even have a breakfast with them, kind of the standard business opportunities you would do to help each other out to kind of make better policies. We couldn't do that. So it's trying to do it on a Teams, a Google Home, or a texting and cell phones that help us kind of do this thing. And it was nuts if you're a freshman or you're new to the state legislature or the policies on how we actually ran this. So there's a lot of things I think we can do without, and that's why I can't wait to see us open the doors again at the Capitol and make sure we get back to work for people there.
But I think, I can't remember if it was on the federal side or statewide, but I heard an interesting perspective, which is, lobbyists that are, I think lobbyists are definitely part of our political system. I think, I would hope that good ones that do a great job for their clients might be a resource that you could use, as you're trying to figure out legislation and stuff like that. But the whole term comes from, they're kind of hanging out in the lobby. You get done with session, they kind of grab you, right? So if they can't hang out in the lobby, how could they lobby, to your point? As the same way to communicate with your peers and stuff. So I'm sure that had effect across the board, just in being able to have those resources available, not only peer to peer, but then also kind of lobbying and industry experts and get that different perspective that you probably use in your process generally.
That's exactly right. And it's those that you can leverage, and back to your original point, leverage those opportunities, I believe, that you can bring success and improve a bill. And actually then, especially during the timing, to get to the right decision makers. So then it becomes in front of a committee hearing or even in front of appropriations or capital budget. You can get a lot more people to partner with you in bipartisan support before it even moves out onto the floor. And then likewise, the same thing when trying to work with Senator Brown and others on the Senate side, you usually can just run across and say, Senator Brown, can I meet you in the hallway? And it'll work, or text her and she can grab on the way we're doing things. And you couldn't do that this year. So yeah, to your point, you're definitely losing that interaction in that respect. So I kind of hope we can get back to that, and just that's the way I ran for this office, frankly, more of a people person to try to get involved and then understand that, and you can talk to people a little bit more, and that's where I think makes us a better country.
You bet. I did want to bring up to anybody that's watching us on Zoom, if you have a question for Representative Boehnke, you can use the question and answer feature at the bottom. If you're watching us on social media, you can put your question in the comment box, and then as we go through our discussion today, we'll do our best to get to you. There's a couple bills that had an effect on us in economic development, and Representative Boehnke, I think it's really cool that I think we belong to Washington Economic Development Association, and you've been a guest speaker on their weekly meetings a couple times now, and especially with your manufacturing bill. It's kind of cool that you're our representative, but you kind of have the statewide reputation, hey, this guy's pro economic development, and we really appreciate that. But a couple of those that I know we all worked on together is the TIP TIF or tax increment financing for jobs bill, which I know has been worked on in the past and was a real great success. And then I mentioned before your manufacturing bill, but could you tell us a little bit about the TIF for jobs bill? Let's start with that, and then we'll get deeper on your manufacturing bill, because I think that's really exciting for what's coming up.
Yeah, no, and I can't thank you enough, because when I first signed up for this, everybody asked, why are you running? And I think we need to spur that economic development. I think over the years, and it's highlighted during the pandemic, that we really need to focus on retaining that good quality workforce in our state and coming out the workforce of the future and things that we can provide opportunities. Currently, when I was looking at manufacturing and starting to do some work over the interim with, can't thank TriDec enough for some of their sources, and working at the state level, like you mentioned with WIDA, and you bring people together like that, you see really how well we stand in comparison to other states and even around the nation. When I was first initially doing it, we were ranked, I think, 20th or 27th, and we were dropping pretty bad. And that was pre-pandemic. So then you start looking at what can we do to support, and you start asking people, and it doesn't matter their background, the things they come from, everybody wants to create jobs. We want to retain and recruit individuals, and business leaders, community members around here came together, and they were happy to chat with me about what can you do to support this. And then it kind of helped me create this from the grassroots efforts to say, here it is. TIF was already on board from pretty ideas that came about from what we see in Kennewick, specifically in the Southridge area, of what you can spur economic development. And the old, if you build it, they will come. The old, we can get the infrastructure, the roads, the background of what small businesses can then create, and then look at that innovation of the creative ideas of people that come up and go, I want to do this, and I want to do it here in a business-friendly environment that will help spur the growth of my community, and then provide us another great opportunity to build jobs and to build out that. So I think TIF's going to be another great one that we got through. I can say a lot of the Republican side didn't like this, the way the tax was going, because it's then, you're for a tax. And I said, not really. It says tax increment financing on there for a reason. So it allows us to specifically look at what we can do in different parts of our community to spur that growth, to allow that money to stay in there, whether it's a port district or others. Build out the broadband, build out the streets, build out the other infrastructure areas that businesses don't have to worry about. So then they can take that off their mind. I always look at it, that's one less thing that a business owner needs to worry about when they're starting a business and then creating those jobs and getting going. They can actually focus on that business itself. And you can't tell, I get a little bit passionate when I start thinking of that. I'm thinking about my friends around the community that have asked me that. It's like, can you at least help us a little bit from the state and doing this and bringing those ideas to the state level? I think it did get a lot more partnership together going, we have to do this. We got to start. This is the time is right now to build on tax increment financing, to put another tool in the toolbox for people to do and getting that out to people for that economic growth. And that's where it kind of spurred the idea of HB 1170. So the help there was building Washington's best manufacturing, or building economic strength through manufacturing act that I helped run through. It was the only, I'm proud to say, a Republican bill that made it through the House, the Senate, and onto the governor's desk without an amendment, without a no vote. It made it through 100% all the way through, first time, with partnerships from the Department of Commerce, leadership from Lisa Brown, Scott Green, a lot of people that have been on your show before, and have helping out with WIDA, the Economic Development Associations, and a lot of people, Association of Washington Business. I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out, but it was a big partnership with a lot of industry leaders that said, we want to do this. Can't thank the unions enough as well, because it works in with the apprentice programs of how we can build manufacturing, sheet metals, pipe fitters, carpenters union, millwrights. They came on board right away and said, yeah, this is what we need. And then even higher education, what we can do there for our trainer workforce. I know locally, PNNL was a big shout out, and Dr. Ashby was on board, and he actually did some testimony in the committee for me to push this even further, when he mentioned a couple of the ideas that we were thinking about research and development into the future and what PNNL can bring to the table as well.
Oh, that's awesome. I know, and again, we have those statewide calls with commerce. I've heard HB 1170 now a couple of times called the Boehnke bill. Like that, everybody's, so I think that, you're going to be in economic development, like you're doing it, because they're calling out the Boehnke bill. And those type of organizations, I've seen them in other states be a real asset for both those local manufacturers, but really, like you're talking about, to get everybody at the table to start to build those talent pipelines that we need for the future workforce. But really, I think what I really appreciate about it is it really kind of gives homage to the state's history in manufacturing, right? When you look at Boeing, the maritime industry, wood products industry with companies like Weyerhaeuser and other ones. I mean, that's our roots. That's where we came from. And, it's like, let's get back to where we were used to be as far as manufacturing excellence, which I think is really cool.
No, thanks, Karl. Appreciate that. I'm a simple guy, and I've had to kind of going old school on that one, because you're exactly right. I think sometimes you get too fancy with things. And if we just go back to the fundamentals of what made this state a great state, let's go back to doing that more.
Yeah, no, and I think for the new industries that we're all working together, to build or even to bring back, like locally, obviously the nuclear power industry, the opportunity with SMRs and even to add a manufacturing element versus that scratch built element of the historic fleet out there in nuclear power, right? So as many components as they can build in a factory, that would definitely be impacted by this legislation, the way that it rolls out, and provide that base to help build those manufacturing jobs and that whole supply chain for nuclear power for sure. Well, and I think you gave a great overview on the tip for jobs, and I'll just say that, I think from a business perspective, and you talk about tax, that although the title of it was tax, it was really about a different way that local entities could have ability to use that property tax that the business was already going to pay. And I think from a business perspective, it gives them a chance to see a better return on that tax that they pay as their investment, whether it's their new factory and having all the infrastructure, or, hopefully offsetting some of the public charges that they might have had to pay to develop that new site. So I think we're really collectively excited to be able to use that in our toolbox for economic development coming up. So,
and that's exactly right. I'm glad you highlighted those areas, because a lot of people think that, no, it's just another government agency coming in and adding another tax. You're right. It's giving that flexibility out there and seeing that return on investment.
Yeah, totally. And then, to your point, especially with your service on Kennewick City Council, it gives local decision makers the ability to do that and kind of be innovative, like you talked about. And I think that's a great opportunity for anybody in the public side to get that chance to have the chance to be innovative, just like, businesses have to be every day just to keep the doors open. So it's a pretty cool piece of legislation. Let's see what's next on my list. How about, kind of my mug thing about being able to go to the west side, represent us here in Eastern Idaho and the mighty 8th district, as you describe us, and being able to relate to folks from the other side. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? And I keep on coming back to this. I know we've talked about it before, but, maybe in the future, would there be a way that we could all work together, maybe do some kind of a legislative tour, and maybe it's key committee chairs or something, but, I think anytime that you build relationships, just like you do, whether you're in Olympia or working remotely with your peers and different parties and being bipartisan, when you have a chance to build that relationship, but bring them here, host them, show them how great the Tri-Cities is, and give them some local perspective on some of the issues that you're bringing to the table. Any ideas about that? And would that help you in your role? And then, kind of build those bonds and relationships?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head, Karl. The goal in anything is to bring people together. And one of my big mantras has always been from my parents and my grandparents is it's reaching out with kindness, reaching out to build bridges, reaching out to make sure we can kind of align with a lot of people. And when you read about different policies, procedures, I think most of the time, 90% of the policies we're all in agreement on. People only read about the 10% or that less than 10% ones that are the controversial ones that we're, adamantly opposed. And I don't believe we're adamantly opposed. It's just we're opposed to certain sections of those. But to your point, a lot of it's just getting to know the other person across the aisle, getting to understand them. And I think we've lost that in our country, in our state, and, our neighborhoods. We got to get back out to just knowing our neighbors, knowing our friends, knowing our families, and get to know each other again, getting off social media. I know I'm a cyber guy and I teach that, but whenever you can, to disconnect and turn the devices off and power down sometimes. It's a recharge the batteries, kind of focus you back to doing that. And when you bring that up to other people and you kind of, we have this thing, even with the Zoom sessions before we went on the floor as our normal thing, if we have to be on the floor at a certain time before we start voting and everything's lined up, they did a really good job of the staff to do all the technical stuff, but we're waiting for other members that would show up. We started talking about things in our communities. You started talking, even on Zoom, you started to get to know people a little bit better, but it's not quite the same if they don't walk the ground with you. We had a thing as a commander in the military is if you can walk the walk, you can walk the talk, and then you can see people who actually had the impact of the decisions that you're going to make. And Paul Harvey thing always sticks to me is what's the rest of the story? You know, what's really going on in the Tri-Cities, and you can highlight things that we've done. We've just examples. We've had people with farmers to drive up to the hydroelectric dam so they can see what a dam actually is and what it's doing and how much we're working together with fish biologists, with environmental scientists, things that we're trying to preserve and work together with our community. But talking to farmers who are there working together to try to do the best we can to not only our nation, but the rest of the world, and the impacts of our number one export or trade is, you know, the ag community. But yeah, having those additional things that we can then see each other, meet each other. Anytime we can get events that would collaborate, bring individuals over. I've already volunteered for 3 or 4 in the Seattle area. I tell people, if you're not going to do it yourself, then you can't expect others to do it, to come over to this side of the mountain. Sure. So I think we got to do our part to show, hey, it's worth my time, my effort. This is important to me. I'm going to show up in person and I'm going to talk to you about whatever you want to talk about. You know, you can't be, you know, you sometimes have to have that backbone. Don't be scared to walk into these discussions and say, hey, I guess we're opposed to some of these things, but, you know, let's look together what we are in agreement on. And even the police reform, that's what I bring up. We're in agreement on a lot of things that we can do, but defunding the police goes too far. And that's where you kind of decide this, no, I'm not going to work together there. But do we want to be community safety? Yeah, we want safety in our communities. We want businesses to grow. We want families to live in a safe environment in our neighborhoods. And we want to continue that. And I think everybody agrees with that at the end of the day. So yeah, those are some great ideas, Karl. And I'm looking forward to, as we reopen, to doing more of that. And hopefully less Zoom, frankly.
No, for sure. And I think you brought up something before. I just wanted to go back to it because I think it's a good example of what you just said, and that's, you know, the judicial decisions where there's got to be a chunk of the transportation bill that deals with fish passage, mainly on the I-5 corridor on the west side. That it's not like there's a choice. The judge says, you know, you're going to do this. I learned a lot just the couple meetings I was able to attend this year. We're part of the Benton Franklin Walla Walla Good Roads Committee, which is a subcommittee of the statewide committee, and you know, one of the priorities that we voted on was the Highway 12 improvement that you talked about all the way to Walla Walla. So we're all excited to get that done. But within that conversation, we learned a lot about, you know, the judicial requirement that the state transportation budget's going to have to allow this fish passage. And you might look at that and go like, you know, it's just a west side issue. What's it got to do with us? Well, actually, it does have something to do with us. When you look at, you know, overall fish, salmon, especially health throughout the Northwest, as it affects local issues like the Lower Snake River dams and fish passage, and, you know, Congressman Simpson's potential proposal to like take out those dams that are really focused on fish recovery. Well, fish recovery up and down the Pacific coast is an issue, and actually fish passage on the west side helps those overall rates. Obviously, it's a different stock and goes up the Snake River, but it does really affect overall fish health, you know, which is a big part of our lifestyle in the Northwest. So, you know, you being able to go to Seattle and participate in some of those things, build that bipartisan and build that relationship seems to be really critical to really being able to be more effective in your role where you do represent us.
Yeah, and I think you earn the respect of others when you do that, and you can talk at that scientific level or even on the facts. I think we've lost trust in facts over the last year is one of the big things that what facts are you using? What facts am I using? And all these debates of, well, I can't trust where you're getting those from. But end of the day, we can at least then see them and go, we do know we have a problem. We need to come up with the right solution. And then working through that decision-making progress, have that respect of others' opinions and get back to, all right, let's focus on the issue here instead of the individual. Let's debate the problem and not individuals anymore. And let's debate where we can come together in the state and make this the best solution we can, whether it's time, resources, or the efforts that we're trying to put together. And hopefully at the end of the day, we can think of these different solutions, and that really creative solutions that we may not have thought of, because too many times people have the ego or arrogance that comes into discussion saying, no, I'm the right answer. Just ask my wife. Yeah, she reminds me every day that she's smarter than I am. Either way, it doesn't matter. So yeah, when you come in thinking you're right, like all married people go, no, I don't think so. So it kind of puts that down a little bit, but at least then we can listen more, we can understand it a little bit more. And the more we're educated and informed about an issue, I think the better solutions come out of that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I know you and I have had the conversation before, but I think a lot of times, and you might get this, when you interact with people in the district, or you get that, the communications from people, but really the goal of any legislative body is to reach compromise, and neither side wins, right? Like that's ultimately, and we could probably share 1,000 stories in the federal or state government about how that works. And so many times in this era of everybody's got their own science, it feels like more polarized on so many issues. I just wanted to say that I think you do a great job, Representative Boehnke, and in trying to be that negotiator, trying to find that compromise. And I know you probably take a lot of heat from maybe even your supporters, because they don't understand how it works. It's like, hey, don't elect me just to go in there and fight and lose, because that's not effective for all of us, right? And I just think you do a great job of actually representing us and in your approach to how you get along with your peers and get stuff done in Olympia for us.
And I appreciate that. That means a lot. And I always try to learn and improve myself and the different ways you go about that. And I think it's earning that respect. It's earning that integrity, that when you do speak out on an issue, it's in a way of trying to do it in kindness and respect of others' opinions, and do it in a fact-based approach that they can agree upon and say, okay, we can disagree with you, or we agree that your facts are there, but we're still going to disagree with you at the end of the day. And we can go out and have a cup of coffee and still have a drink, and we're still friends. And I still tell people, I've met a lot of friends who are Democrats. I know a lot of people listening on board are Democrats and Republicans. And I remind people, I represent the mighty 8th district, and it's not Republicans only or independents. It's everybody, and the families and people that live around us, and my neighbors and friends. And, we're doing what we can to support us getting that much better. And hopefully at the end of the day, it makes us a better state.
Oh, exactly. You think, Representative Boehnke, with your military experience and background, are there things that you learned within the military establishment as you went through your career that kind of translate and help you do exactly what you're doing for us in Olympia? Is there some lessons learned that you're kind of bringing to the table that you've kind of, I don't want to say been there, done that, but is there a connection there?
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that, Karl, because a lot of times when you are in discussions, debates, or even working a bill or in a hearing, as you're going through about what question and how you frame a question, or how you look back and you try to tap in the experiences that you've had in the past, whether it's a previous job, previous work environment, and things that you've gone through. And the military does, I think, help you out a lot more, because having been to Iraq, Afghanistan, and overseas, and a lot of places that people forget, the military in the U.S. is probably the most multicultural, most diverse organization in the world, because you have people from all walks of life, all different economic, social backgrounds, and you bring them together and try to get them to go toward a single vision, a single goal. And those different techniques is what I tap into. To your point, it's that one thing of listening, it's integrity, it's the ethical background of really dedication to duty, and saying it's not about me as a selfless servant, it's about the group, it's about the mighty 8th district. And I kind of put that in place of when I was going into Iraq or into combat in different areas. It's the same thing. It's my goal is to get everybody in there and everybody home again to their families. This one's the same way. As we're going to go in, we're going to do the best we can with policies, procedures, but I'm going to have to stand up, when we need to stand up and have a line in the sand, say we can't go this far. Too many taxes is too much. But really, at the end of the day, getting back to voicing the opinions who've elected me in this position. It's not about me. It's about the 8th district and what we can do for the people of the 8th, and how we listen, work hard, and do the best we can, and making this a better place. But you're right. It's getting back to a lot of those military acumens and different traits, I think, over the years that has definitely helped me out.
Yeah. So I think you talked a little bit before it, or maybe yesterday, but do you think there will be a special session with some of the governor's vetoes? I think that's going to happen? And then as you look forward to next year's legislative session, what do you see, like where there's some bills that are kind of still lingering that are going to come back, and what do you see coming up in kind of that short term, longer term for the next legislative session?
No, thanks, Karl. It just seems like we just left the last session, so I'm still kind of taking a breath, frankly. Have not had vacation yet, so people are still trying to get their feet, done from that crazy session. But you're right. A lot of this is still not finished. With the vetoes that are coming up from the governor, I do believe some of those would probably be the first ones that would actually trigger a special session. And right now we're hearing maybe August or September because of the interconnectivity. You mentioned the grand bargain that was tied together to some of the Climate Commitment Act and some of the transportation efforts that are going on. We want to make sure that funding gets out to the individual municipalities. I know locally we have several projects that want to make sure they stay and continue to keep going. And then your economic growth, things that we mentioned already between the TIF and things that continue on. I know with 1170, my big one is to make sure that builds on itself, to reach out, to listen, to see what we can do to start, I think, having a plan moving forward over the next 10, 20, 30 years and meeting the guidelines of bringing back women-owned, minority-owned businesses and reaching out more that we can in our communities to do that. Those are some of the areas I'm going to focus on, as well as the money toward rural broadband would be on the top ones that we're supposed to be seeing and working with. Again, Lisa Brown at the Department of Commerce and the state broadband office as well, to get that actually out to communities. Now that we've got it going, we've all voted on it. It's a matter of making sure it's done the right way.
Yeah, maybe we could talk about that for just a minute. Do you have locally an idea of how some of those new state dollars would roll out? And I know some of our local utility districts, I think Benton REA has one, Franklin PUD might. I'm not sure about Benton PUD. I can't remember, even though they're my service provider. But there's some utilities that are doing some broadband things, and I know I don't think locally, but ports and other parts of the state have been really effective in like a dark fiber model. But what do you see some local improvements could be, and who would be the entity that would, whether it's being the internet service provider, ISP, or even doing like dark fiber backhaul, kind of this port model? Do you have an idea, or is it still kind of too early? Like the legislation, the ink's still wet on the piece of paper, or what do you think?
The ink's still wet, but we have an idea. Again, tapping in my background in the military, we had something similar to this that we went through. So the low-hanging fruit is leveraging the ports, utilities where they're at, but providing the flexibility to where you can have the ISPs through the telecoms to get out into our community. So we have a good relationship between both sides that allows the opportunity to go out into further the community where it's at, and then reaching out to maybe some of the farmlands to get it out to the rural sectors as well. I know Benton REA is one I think of as well, talking to them, just kind of expand their networks, but get them the grant funding to where there's no additional impacts onto their structure now, possibly increasing more transparency through the state broadband office and ensure that they're getting the support we need from the state to the local municipalities. But really, after that, it's taking the hands off and saying, all right, local people, you take the decision, you move it forward. State needs to then back off and say, all right, we want to make sure we are transparent and accountable to the funding of the people's money. But then after that, to get it out and then ensure that we're doing the right way. And I think in one of the first bills we did, HB 1336, was the one that had actually accountability in it. So we can, after 2 years, we can come back together, find out to make sure if that's working, and then be accountable if we need to tweak it. That may be future legislation to kind of expand or improve off of.
Okay. Is there any language that's, and I'm sure you guys are like technology neutral, but obviously we read a lot about Starlink, the SpaceX project. In fact, my wife was taking a neighbor kid home the other day, and she got out of the car and she thought like aliens were invading or something, because she saw I forget what they called it, but like the satellites in the sky, and they were all lined up and stuff. It was really cool. But with your background and experience and then the legislation, is there funding opportunities? Is there a requirement to make a physical connection, or would wireless or, even satellite technologies qualify, or, what are some of the parameters in the bill?
Well, and that's a great point because you hit on it. The more technology changes, you have policy that's always outdated because we're writing policy now for the current speeds that people think are high speed are 100 megabits, or initially it was 25 megabits, and then you had 5 downloads. So it's like, good grief. I remember the dial-up days. I know you're a lot younger than I am, Karl, but I remember the dial-up days and going, man, this is almost getting to dial-up speeds. Like, that's high-speed internet. And now if we can get that at 100 megabits, and Starlink's one of the good ones that are showcasing where we can get to rural communities. I know the Ho tribe throughout the state has gotten the first kind of grants and funding from the state broadband. And it's amazing some of the feedback we're seeing from just the initial one. And that was from last summer when they did initial beta testing and things that are out there. Now that Starlink's got the additional satellites you mentioned, my son was on the back porch watching the satellites across the sky going, Dad, is that thing you're talking about? And I said, yeah, that's it. So hopefully with increased coverage allows us to increase speeds as well to get everybody that connectivity. So to your point, I think you're going to end up having to change some of the policies for advanced technologies to ensure that it's not an actual ISP running it, but you're still going to have a centralized agency that's going to have to maintain and manage it. It's because the next phase, like anything in a business, is how do you sustain it and how do you maintain it? And then what's going to be our life cycle replacement to grow it? So if 100 megabits is the way it is now, just think about 1,000 megabits or 1 gig into our homes. I mean, I know kids on the call or parents on the call right now are like, yeah, we don't need faster. So we need to just unplug sometimes. But yeah, that's our goal, is to increase the coverage, increase the, the capabilities for the network.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think I'll just throw another concept out there, but I think the state recognizing it and opening some of the funding up to public agencies, because I think you guys probably had this discussion, right? Like internet access, broadband availability is kind of analogous to other public infrastructure things. Like 100 years ago, a city or a county weren't necessarily in the road business. They might not have necessarily been in the wastewater treatment business, probably in the water, but, the role of a public entity as it affects that, even electrification throughout the West, right? If there wasn't necessarily a big federal program, there's a lot of places that might not still have electric power. And so it's tough when you're sitting in the public policy to kind of say, well, what's the right model? You don't want to compete with private business, but at the same time, private business doesn't have a business model. Like their window, especially if they're publicly held, they're traded publicly, they've got maybe a 7, but even as short as a 3-year that they've got to make their money back on the investment. And, when you're stringing a lot of fiber or something in between houses out in the country, it's tough to get that payback. Whereas a public entity that could do bonding and other things, it might have a 20-year payback or something. Then you could kind of bring that cost of capital down to where you can actually make some of those bigger and longer term investments. So I think that's a tough thing to do is don't compete with private, but at the same time, let's get it done, because we know that this is it's a big public issue, especially in COVID. It's really pointed that out.
It has, and you're getting to know me better, Karl, as I'm a get it done kind of guy. I want to do it, and I know this may be roughly even Republicans on my side of the aisle going, why are you supporting this kind of stuff? Because you don't want to ever get in the way of the government making a decision to where we have one to take advantage of the other, government over private or public over private kind of things. But you're looking across the board. I told somebody the other day is I want all options on the table to where we can then make sure we can manage each thing that comes forward, and we can make sure we limit what we need to. And I think we've gotten the right balance to where we can limit that public-private partnerships and ensure it's moving forward where it's not overwhelmingly government, because then you have too much of your eggs in one basket to where private would come in. But to your point, private's not going to run in there if there's not some kind of return on investment for the individuals, or if it costs out. Nobody's going to go into business unless that's going to work. And through some of the efforts we can, I think it then spurs that economic development to our point earlier of the bigger overall goal is then builds our community out, spurs that economic development, and then brings jobs to our area that says, hey, why can't we be like, Silicon Valley? They didn't have this stuff, like you said, 30 years ago, and they're building up Apple and all these different products in the innovative spaces. And now we have a great location where people are coming to our community because they don't like the traffic. They love the sunshine, all the great parts of what the chamber always brings up, right? And then now we can have internet, high-speed broadband, and things that you can do, whether you need to have a work-life balance, stay at home sometimes, or work at, on the brick and mortar locations. But yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. I know no policy is always 100% perfect. Like anybody says, there's always some flaws, but that's where I think we've got a foothold, and we're going to build it out, and it's going to be really good.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, let's do one more quick question, and then we'll give you some time to wrap up. But we talk about climate change and then going carbon free. And obviously, we know the CETA standard and everything else. But I think from a local perspective, we have conversations with businesses all the time, and I know you've had the conversation too. But some of the targets that are just targets right now, the legislation that might restrict, say, future natural gas use as an example, which I don't think anybody out there is at this point generally is saying like, we don't believe in climate change, but from a business perspective, to try to flatten out what some of those capital costs to make the conversion, especially for our food processors that have like natural gas boilers, and how do we electrify that? And then, as you know really well, we're essentially at a cap from BPA, from all our local utility districts. We've had an opportunity to bring in, or at least talk to battery manufacturers or somebody that are real clean tech. They got a big electrical load. Well, our local utility districts have to go buy that power on the open market because BPA can't supply it. So if we, on the industrial side, if we shift away at too fast a rate, I think, from natural gas, we're not only going to have challenges with businesses staying here that maybe they could go to other states if they wouldn't have to do that. But then also, how do we meet that electrical load if we're going to electrify it? So just wanted to give you a chance to talk about that, and anything that we can do to kind of get everybody around the table, come up with some realistic programs or timelines that we could all work on this together. We'd be happy to partner with you for sure, Representative Boehnke.
No, and thanks, Karl. Again, just having the team together and discussing those ideas, one thing, it's really laying it all on the table and looking at our options. And I believe in one thing is not reducing those options, but expanding them and seeing where hydrogen can be a piece of that, with battery storage, with wind, solar, hydro, and nuclear as well. And then how can that technology grow and prosper other ideas in doing that? And I do believe everybody does support the environment. We all agree that there is issues we need to discuss. And one thing we haven't talked about is the forest fires and the fires that have happened the last couple of years. A lot of people said it was climate change or not. One way or the other, we got to look at policies where we can help fire management or manage our forests that do affect. When I was young, and you mentioned it before, was why can't we plant more trees to help out? And then we can actually bring the prices of lumber down from Home Depot and places right now that are going through the roof. And then supporting some of those healthy initiatives that I think we can all agree upon of, we need a recycle program, but do it the right way. We need a place where we can have grid reliable systems and not have brownouts or have a freeze like you see in other states. We need to have backup contingency operations to make sure we're good to go as we go electric, or have an infrastructure that has that opportunity to do that. But we need to look at the entire sourcing of creation of that energy to the distribution, transmission of that energy, and then the storage, and then the capacity when it's going to be used, and make those right solutions based on what we see as our usage cycle. And I say that because, the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine, and it comes down to when do we need it, when do we most peak hours, and, you turn on the air conditioner or the heater during the winter. We want to make sure it's there and we have a backup. But we'll get there. And I know these are going to be some of the top priorities moving forward. And I'm proud to partner with you and others on this and making sure we're doing the right direction. And again, leading the nation I believe, and recruiting and getting those discussions here in the Tri-City area is great. I mean, we have the world's greatest scientists, I still believe, in the Tri-City area, and having them in these discussions and bringing these things and doing the work that we've done, it just, again, inspires me as a leader in just one piece of the puzzle of what we can do to make this a better place for all of us.
Oh, that's great. Well, Representative Boehnke, we really appreciate your time. It's been a great discussion. I've learned a lot, and I think that's been great for me in these Coffee with Karls, as I get a chance to meet a lot of people remotely and have a good conversation. But I do personally want to thank you for your service to our state. When you run for elected office, if you've never done it before, people understand just like what an election's like and some of the things you get into politically. And I just think you're doing a great job representing all of us. You've been a great partner for us at TriDec and economic development and our community in general. So I want to say thanks. Thanks for your time today. And do you have any closing remarks for us?
Yeah, and a question for you. When are we going to actually have coffee with Karl? I sign up for this, Tracy gets me on this, and I don't have coffee with me, so that's my first one. But no, thanks for the kind words, because it means a lot. And I can't thank my family enough, because it does take your family all involved into doing this, and the community members who support us each and every day, and then continue to. We went through a long suffering time in this last year. I think it's one of those historic times that we won't ever forget. But I know we're going to grow. We're going to make it better and be better for it in the long run. And bringing people together is a key, getting back to what we are as, Americans again, and those traditional values that we're all out here to help each and every one of us. And I think every day, and having the Coffee with Karls and things like that help communicate and getting that message out of what's going on in our community. And I mentioned a couple of times, that motivates me and continues to allow me the opportunity to represent people. And I'm just happy to help and do my little piece of the world.
Well, thanks again for your time today. Thanks again for the great job you're doing for all of us in Olympia. And I'll get back to you when we're going to sit down and have that cup of coffee. And I look forward to having some real coffee with you.
Deal. Me too.
All right. Well, thanks again for your time today. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Karl. Appreciate it.
Okay.